All right, let's welcome our guest this week, Jason Coy.
Hello, Jason. Now let's
thanks for having me.
Now let's play.
Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. Judging a book by its cover.
All right.
We did it.
We did it. Well, I fluffed a bit at the beginning.
We still haven't introduced that. Perfect. All right.
All right. I'm going to guess what Jason does for a living or for what his expertise is. It might not be a living.
Yeah,
he might just be a big Madonna fan. Do you know a lot about Madonna?
No.
So he's a virgin. Okay, so it looks like you're sitting in an office or something like that, a place of work. Or is this are you in your house?
No, this is my place of work.
I was about to say, I don't know anyone who decorates their house with just like a table with one chair put into the corner. They've gone the Venetian blind. All right, so, okay.
Books,
so
your favorite. He's got books.
He's got books.
You love talking about books.
Yeah, no. Look, my place of work doesn't have books.
I don't think there's a single book in here.
My home actually has a lot of books because
I got big pictures.
I got my home interior decorated, and they just bought me a whole lot of books for a shelf. And I look at them every now and again, and I go, I might read that one day. And they're things like the pictures of Coco Chanel is one of the books.
A lot of picture books.
Yeah, my father used to sit and get a book each day and open it up and go, that's what Metallica did back in the day. All right, so this looks like an educational place. Do you work in an educational place?
Yes.
Okay. Are you a professor, Jason?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Jason's a professor.
I just want to tell you, so this subject today is very specific. Sometimes we're just like, we're very broad. Like we talked about plane, flight last time, or, it's very specific.
Oh,
this is more of an event.
Professor.
Oh.
It's in history. It's in history. It's an American history.
The history of nuts on mag wheels.
Wow,
What?
you got it.
That's really specific.
How did you get it?
So it's history based. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, history based. Has the history happened in the last 100 years?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's a good way to get an answer.
Yeah.
That
was a good question.
No, that is. I could go war or something. That's all. I won't say the Second World War. You see what I did? You see what I did there?
Yep. Process of elimination. Good work.
Okay. Is your specialty subject? Is it war? Is it a war?
No.
Is it based on structures like pyramids and shit like that?
No.
No.
Right? That's a good one.
Skyscrapers would be a good topic.
Pyramids would be better.
I
like skyscraper.
Yeah. They're low pointers, they call
All
them.
right, it's about history. It's in America. There's 3 words that is the title. One of the things women dress up like in Halloween.
Oh, yeah, the history of sluts.
They could be a slutty one.
I've been looking forward to this all the time.
They could be a slutty one of these.
Oh, a slutty one of these.
And think of a broom.
Oh, witches.
All right, yeah. So you got witches. Now, specifically with witches in America.
Oh, the Salem witch hunt.
That is correct.
All right.
There you go.
All right,
Salem Witch Trials.
I can tell you a lot of this, man.
Really?
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Jason Coy is a professor of history at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, where he teaches classes on witchcraft and witch hunting in early modern Europe and colonial America. He received his doctorate at UCLA in 2001 and is the author of The Devil's Art, a book about folk magic and witchcraft in pre-modern Europe, published by the University of Virginia Press. He also has appeared in a Travel Channel documentary series on the Salem Witch Trials called The Witches of Salem. And his book, The Devil's Art, it's available everywhere, right? Amazon, and I don't know where else you buy books, but definitely Amazon and anywhere else you buy books.
All right.
And if you can tell us a little bit more just about how do you know about witches? It's very specific.
Well, it's just basically from teaching classes on it here at the College of Charleston and working on this book. I've researched it for many years, and then I got involved in that documentary, and it got me more involved in learning about Salem itself. And it's a really interesting episode. So I'll be interested to see what Jim knows about it.
So what was the documentary? Was it Hoobie's Halloween? I've seen that. that was set in Salem.
I watched the first 7 minutes
No,
of
actually,
that.
WandaVision comics.
I watched Hoobie's Halloween. And I thought Salem looks like a nice place. It was Adam Sandler. Every one in 4 films he has to go, okay, ready, like that. I can't do the voice, but that's like in his contract. Yeah, Netflix went 1 in 4, do the voice.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Jim everything he thinks he knows about Salem Witch Trial. We'll have a few witch questions, general witch questions.
Sure.
You know, so.
We have a segment called Which is Which.
Yeah, well, we should.
Yeah.
And then you're going to give him a grade on 0 to 10, through 10 on his knowledge of the Salem Witch Trials, Jason. And then Kelly's going to grade him on confidence. I'm going to grade him on et cetera. We're going to put them all together. And 0 through 10, I don't know. I didn't even do this. Broomhilda. She's a witch, right?
Yeah.
And 11 through 20, which is the Beastwick. 21 through 30, Sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
I figured you'd want to be a
I
sandwich.
love sandwich. That's from the Earl of Sandwich. When we do the podcast on that, he was the first bloke to go 2 bits of bread and put things in between the bread. Fuck off, dude. Like, seriously, what were people just putting things on the outside of bread and putting the bread in the middle, putting all the toppings in? Of course. How hard was that invention?
Someone had to invent it. All right. What's a witch?
That is a good question, Bryce. That is a good question. A witch is, I would say, not mythical, is maybe not the a mythical being that people at some stages in our history have believed to be real, and they believe in the dark arts. They can cast spells on people. What?
It's just funny because you were very excited to pull that out of your brain. The dark arts.
Dark arts. They believe in spells. Back in Salem and stuff like that, they believed if you could swim, they were good swimmers, right? They were good swimmers for some reason, right? That's whenever I watch the Olympics, I'm like this. Look at these bunch of witches. Anyway, so people believe they fly on broomsticks. Their shopping list always has Eye of Newt. That's always on their shopping list. They're like, oh, I'm all out of Eye of Newt. Better go down to the 7-Eleven, which sells Eye of Newt.
What is witchcraft?
Witchcraft, well, it's the practice of being a witch. It's the spells and the.
That's another thing I like when you have to put it well for us. Obviously, it's the practice of
we all know this.
Well, it's the practice of making spells and doing witch-like activities.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the Salem Witch Trials, but before we do that, like just a little bit like kind of global history of witches. What do you know? How far back are they referenced? Like where, like, do you know anything else about them around the world besides?
Well, yeah, see, that's the thing is Salem seems to be the most popular place, but I assume that they didn't invent them. That couldn't have been like the first time they had witches. I would assume they would come from Europe, would be the original places, the home of gargoyles and where dragons were mythically invented and all those type of things. So I would say that they're a Western Europe. I'm going to go Western Europe. I'm going to say it happened somewhere in France or something like that. I don't believe it's Eastern Bloc countries. Yes, I am witch. I don't think I am coming here with you with tracksuit and I am going to cast spell. I don't believe that's a thing. And to our Eastern European listeners, well done on getting the internet.
I think Jason Coy, he might be from, I don't know where he's from.
I'm fine with it. What are they going to do? I don't do gigs there anyway.
That's Jason. I meant Jason, our guest. I don't know where he's from. He's not wearing a tracksuit.
Originally, Chicago.
Okay,
yeah.
You're fine.
Yeah, and Coy's not an Eastern European.
What were the Salem Witch Trials?
Salem Witch Trials were, what happened was there was, they believed that there was an influx of witches that had come into town. And so when you were like married and you were getting tired or bored of your wife, right, and you just wanted her out of the house, you could point at her and go witch. Now, I'm trying to bring this back. I'm trying to bring it back, but you could go witch, and people would. That's why they always refer to things. This is like the Salem witch hunt. Like cancel culture now, they're saying is like a Salem witch hunt, or the McCarthyism that happened in in the 60s, where they said everybody was a communist. You're a communist. You're a communist, and just being told that you're something was enough for you to be put on trial with very little to no evidence. And then what would happen in the Salem witch hunt? They would throw people off cliffs And if they flew away, they're like, "Told ya, fucking witch." But if they plummeted to their death, they would go, "Oh, well, you can't get them all right." And
you win some, you lose
and
some.
she died an honourable death. And then they get, and same thing, they would throw them into, they would put them into water, and if they were to swim, God heaven forbid they were swimmers, they would be a witch. If they drowned. See, the problem was they'd start drowning, and then there'd be someone like, I could swim in there and help them, but I don't want to be accused myself. So that's how they would do it.
When were they? How long did they last?
Oh God, I saw The Crucible. The play was about 3 hours.
Yeah, that's pretty short.
I would say, they happened 1816 to 1829.
Okay.
Salem witch hunts.
And was this the biggest witch trial in Salem? Was that the biggest one?
I'm going to say, but wait a minute. I must have got the years right. If you're going, if that was the biggest one,
That's just the next question.
There was only one. There was only one that was called the Salem Witch Trials. The other ones were called Witch is Witch, and it was like a game show. And they'd bring two women out.
That's a good pitch.
Because men, I don't believe, could be trialed for witchcraft. There was a female thing.
And how many in the Salem witch trials were accused, and how many were executed?
Oh, they accused 100 people, and they executed 80.
Okay. So what caused them to hunt for witches? There was something that happened that, like, now historically looking back, that they think happened, that was a reason that caused them to look for witches.
All the women got together and they were talking and gossiping and stuff, and then they were coming home and they were going, do you know that Goody Davis's house, they have themselves a new blah blah blah, why don't we have one of those? And he's like, yeah, fuck. What happened was one guy was trying to call his wife a bitch, and he had a speech impediment.
Okay.
He goes, yeah, fucking witch.
Who?
And you're like, oh, he's got a soft B that sounds like a W.
Who was Tituba?
Oh,
I don't even know why I asked. But.
I'm well versed in one booba and three booba.
No, Tituba.
Oh no, I mean to one tuba and three tuba. Tituba. Tituba sounds like a manservant on an island from a movie from the 1950s where they were racially insensitive.
Like Scaramanga.
Yeah.
You're
like,
right. We just threw that question in here for a
they're like this. How are we going to fix things? I need to feed my family. Tituba.
Okay, there's some more questions, but I'm going to kind of cruise through some of these. What is a witch cake?
Oh, it's something you buy at Halloween from Baskin Robbins, and it's a layer of brownie, Oreo, or any ice cream you have, but I go the Oreo, and then you put on the top of it, you go, which cake? You write that on top of it.
You already answered this. You said no men were accused of practicing witchcraft.
They were warlocks. If I learned anything, and Jason, when you start talking, you'll confirm this. If I've learned anything, Bewitched was pretty close to what happened, and there is a statue of Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched in the town of Salem. So they have, and she's on a broom and she's wearing the hat and all that type of stuff. So there, I must get a point for that. You're not even going to ask that, but I knew that.
Yeah.
And men were called warlocks and witches. And then like her mother was called Agatha.
Okay. What methods were used to put accused to death? You said they threw him off a cliff and threw him in the water.
And put him in water.
Okay. Anything else?
Electroshock therapy.
Oh, yeah. Here, a couple more questions here. What was the touch test?
Oh, well, you felt like, because witches always had warts and stuff like that, so you felt their skin like braille to see if there was warty bumps.
You got so many of these right. I don't know how to do them. You maybe know this. What major play written in 1953 was fictionalized version of the Salem Witch Trials?
The Crucible, written by, what was his name? He married Marilyn Monroe. Fucking forgot his name, but I've seen that, Goody Proctor and all that type of stuff. And it was a mirror being held up against McCarthyism when they were doing the things about the communism.
Okay. And then last thing, now that we've looked back on this and historically, how is history, has any of the wrongs been righted? Has there been any like retribution? Like,
What do you mean the wrongs have been right? You can't bring the people back to life, Forrest.
well, I mean, like historically, looking back on it, what's happened now? As far
Oh,
as,
we don't believe in witches anymore.
yeah, forget it. We'll get to it. All right, Jason, on 0 to 10, 10 being the best. How did Jim do in his knowledge of witches and the Salem witch trial?
This is a tough one.
It's
in
not tough.
general, yeah, okay. Well, he did really terribly, except for the one about the crucible. He completely nailed it. So I would say a 5.
A 5.
That's a really good
2
score.
points. I got a point for the Elizabeth Montgomery statue.
You're a college professor, Jason.
He's graded on a
5
curve.
that's a 50%. So that's still an F.
Yeah, there's still an F. That's the best score I've ever gotten in school.
No way he got half of these right. I'm giving him a -10 for confidence.
Yeah. I'm just throwing you into a river. That's your
Burn
score.
him at the stake.
Oh, they were rivers. I thought it was a backyard swimming pool. Squeaky door, clogged sinks, finicky engines. When things break down in your house, you take care of it. You do. You take care of it. However, when something's off in the bedroom, you just try to not think about it. Come on, man. What are you waiting for? Take care of it. Go to getroman.com/IDK now. That's getroman.com/IDK now. With Roman, you can get a free online evaluation and ongoing care for your ED. That's erectile dysfunction for you simpletons out there. ED. All from the comfort and the privacy of your own home. You have to go into a doctor like an idiot and walk in. I'm not getting erections. What can you do? You just say it over the Zoom. AUS licensed healthcare professionals will work with you to find the best treatment plan. If medication is appropriate, it ships free with 2-day shipping. The whole process is straightforward and discreet. Getting started is simple. Just go to getroman.com/IDK and complete your online visit. Take care of your ED without leaving your home. Complete an online visit today and connect with a healthcare professional and just take care of it, guys. You know, you want to please your woman or your man, or just if you want to have a wank. Maybe you're a lonely person. You can't even wank anymore. Get on board. Go to getroman.com/IDK now and you'll get $15 off your first month. It's ready to take care of your ED. And remember, get started today and you'll receive $15 off your first order of ED treatment. Get Roman. Fellas, the sport of business means demanding excellence from your craft and wardrobe. Your fit needs to be versatile, blending timeless style and comfort so it looks as good as you feel. For that, there's Cuts Clothing. I got the Cuts Clothing. They gave me some Cuts Clothing. I wear the Cuts all the time. They've taken the classic men's fashion staple, the plain tee. It's a wonderful t-shirt. It feels like it's very soft, very soft cotton. And they've refined it, combining premium quality with a minimalistic aesthetic. Cuts shirts, polos, hoodies, and crew sweatshirts are made from the man who works hard, but plays even harder, and never settles for less, all in the sport of business. Built for performance in the boardroom, the bar, or the gym, Cuts Clothing keeps you sharp wherever the game takes you. Take a plain tee, but make it Tony Stark. The bleeding edge of fabric technology meets the man confident enough to wear it. Cuts Clothing. In 2016, Cuts founder Steve Borelli set out to create clothes ready for every occasion for the modern man. He started by reinventing the t-shirt. The end result? What Q magazine calls, and I quote, the only shirt worth wearing.
GQ?
That's
GQ
it. What did I say?
Q magazine. You don't
You don't want to go to Q magazine.
QAnon people don't wear cuts.
GQ magazine. The signature buttery soft PYCA P-Car Pro Tri-Blend Tee. I don't know what they did this, baby. It is the softest t-shirt I've ever had. It's a bold new take on a classic design, combining the ultimate blend of high-quality cotton, polyester, and spandex. Just try it and tell me I'm wrong. Never anything softer. It's not just a lifestyle. It's not just a clothing. It's office leisure apparel for the sport of business. Get 15% off your first order by going to cutsclothing.com/IDK. That's cutsclothing.com/IDK for 15% off the only shirt worth wearing.
Okay. I asked Jim what a witch is. He says a mythical being that people at some stage in their history believe to be real, dark arts, cast spells, good swimmers, flying broomsticks. I have Newt always on the shopping list.
Yeah. How did I not get a point for that?
What is a witch and like what's witchcraft? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as what's a witch, he did fine. That is exactly the sort of stereotype of a witch, and in some ways what they were thought of to be long ago in the past. But in terms of the crime of witchcraft, in 17th century New England, witchcraft was a double crime. Part of it was exactly what Jim was talking about, and that is using black magic to harm your neighbors, to kill livestock, to hurt children. But the other half was diabolism, and that means selling your soul to the devil in exchange for getting this power to revenge yourself on your neighbors.
Oh, wow.
That's the part I
So it had this
do.
darker dimension of devil worship and that sort of thing.
Okay. And then globally, Jim said Salem did not invent witches. They came from Europe.
Yeah.
But like
another point.
historically, like when's the first time witches were referenced? Like where does that, do we know, or is it not?
Witchcraft is extremely prevalent in human history. The earliest mentions of witchcraft go all the way back to the origins of civilization almost 3,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. They're mentioned in Homer's Odyssey. They're mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy. And in fact, people still believe in witches and hunt witches in areas of the world today, like Africa and parts of South Asia.
They hunt them?
Yeah.
Absolutely. In countries today, like Ghana, there are places called witch camps where villagers who have been accused by their family members or their neighbors of being witches have to be sheltered by the government so that they're not susceptible to mob violence and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, it's a cultural difference. Who are we to judge? Maybe they're right. Maybe we're wrong.
Maybe there really are witches there.
It is funny, when I was reading your bio, it says he teaches classes on witchcraft and witch hunting. It sounds like you teach witch hunting. It's a fun class.
So is witch hunting similar to that of like a vampire slayer? Like, is there a way to kill a witch? Like, you know how you put a stake through the heart of a vampire? You give a silver bullet to a werewolf. How do you kill a witch?
Well, in Salem, they just they hanged them.
Yeah. I forgot that. Hanging. That was the other one, hanging.
Did anyone ever think they were a witch who was on trial, or were they always just like innocent people?
That's a great question. It's controversial, but there seems to be some evidence that a few of the people that were executed in Salem many of them were thought to be witches by their neighbors. Some of them had been under suspicion of being witches for decades beforehand. But there's some evidence that some of them may have practiced folk magic or witchcraft. One of them, Bridget Bishop, who was executed, some workmen that were working on her house, they said that in the basement of her house, they found what they called poppets, which were like little voodoo dolls that were kind of a sign of witchcraft. So there's some evidence that some of them may have been sort of dabbling in magic in these ways.
Why was it just this one little town of Salem? Why didn't it take off, or did it take off across America and this was just the place that had the most hangings? But it seems like it was pretty contained.
Well, America, first of all, there were a lot more witches, as you sort of said. It started in Europe. I mean, there were witches hanged in England, and something like 100,000 people were tried for witchcraft in Europe between about 1450 and about 1650. Maybe 60,000 of them were executed. So it was much bigger in Europe. In Salem, there's 19 people who were executed, and about 150 or so that are accused and jailed and under suspicion. So Salem's small by Europe's standards, but it's big by America's standards. So half the people that are executed in the history of the New England colonies, half of them happen in Salem in 1692.
And you remember my ancestor that I said came over on the Mayflower?
Which?
Well, his son was accused in the Salem witch trials, went to jail, and then his friends broke him out of jail 15 weeks later, and he escaped.
Sick.
I don't think there was no witch hunts in LA, were there?
No.
Oh, man.
But they happen in other states.
What's that?
New York, Maryland. They happened in other states in the old, in the American colonies at the time.
There was a witch in Camp Cucamonga, Rancho Cucamonga, up to 405.
Everyone in LA is a witch now, though.
Up to 405.
Why is your LA person Canadian?
It's the only voice I can do.
Okay. It's a Canadian voice. So the Salem witch trials, I mean, we've been talking about them, but so how did that? I asked Jim what they were. He said there was an influx of witches that had come to town, or how did it start? Or
It started very small in the house of the local minister. His last name was Parrish. In his house, his daughter, Betty Parris, started having fits. She started going into convulsions, and she started complaining of a fever and shrieking and things. And so they called the local doctor, and he said that he suspected that an evil hand had been placed upon her, that maybe she'd been bewitched. And over the course of several months, a bunch of other young women, so we're talking most of them in the ages of around 9 to about 13, started to exhibit similar symptoms. And then they started to accuse neighbors of being the ones that had bewitched them, that had tormented them. And that's what led to these indictments and these trials, and to people ultimately being executed for this.
Hold on, just a minute. Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible. Boom. Back to it.
You got a 10,
I've
Jim.
been playing on that. I've been thinking about that for fucking ever. Oh, God, that was a good release. Oh. All right, so back to the witch hunt.
Okay. And how long did they last? I'm sorry,
ahead.
Jim said 1816 to 1829.
Yeah, it's in the 1700s
that
now, I
was
can
his
tell.
very worst answer.
Yeah,
that was
okay.
the farthest off. It was okay. So it started in
It wasn't
January
witch
of
cake? Hold on a second. It wasn't witch cake at Baskin Robbins? Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no. This was worse. So it started in 1692 in January,
Oh, wow.
when the first of these girls started to have these mysterious symptoms. The trials themselves, they took a few months for those to get started. Those went from June to September, but then it really didn't end until the following May in 1693, when the last of the suspects that were in jail were finally released.
Oh, so it just lasted a year, and so you said 19 people were killed, and then 100, was it, in prison? Did you say something like that?
The records are not great on that, but it seems like about 150.
So was there a moment in the town of Salem where they got together and had a council meeting or whatever, and they went, "Oh, this is all bullshit," right? Like, why did it end? When did they see the light?
That's a great question. Well, when the initial people that these young girls started to accuse fit the stereotype of a witch. So they were old, cantankerous women, outsiders, people who had a bad reputation in the village. So when they named those sorts of people, like Tituba, we'll talk about her in a minute, I think, or people like Sarah Good, who were outsiders, everyone was behind it. They had public executions, crowds showed up, and everything was progressing. But they started to name people who were well respected and prominent members of the community, godly women like Rebecca Nurse. They even named a former minister, George Burroughs, as a suspected witch. And that's when people started to doubt whether these accusations were valid or not. And so that kind of cooled off the crisis a little bit.
But did they ever denounce that there wasn't witches? Okay, that's a better question. When did America acknowledge that witches didn't exist?
That took a long time after Salem. At the end of this trial, everyone still believed in witchcraft. I mean, that's one thing that's really important to understand. This was a Puritan society. They lived by the Bible. This was before the scientific revolution. The best minds of the age, people like Cotton Mather, that came and advised the judges, who had graduated from Harvard University, spoke a number of languages, very well read. He believed absolutely in witchcraft, and he had the Bible to back him up. Witches are mentioned in the Bible. And so everyone believed in witchcraft. What they didn't believe in increasingly was the use of evidence in the trial. So that is, they had been using what's called spectral evidence. It meant that these little girls who were supposedly bewitched could say, well, I know it was Goody Nurse that did this to me because she came to me in spectral form at night and pinched me or bit me or shook me and told me to sign the devil's book and become a witch. So it was all based on this kind of hearsay, and people started to doubt whether that evidence was valid. But they did it in religious terms. They said, well, couldn't the devil have come in the form of Goody Nurse and done this? And so they started to doubt that kind of thing, the legal basis of it.
How are witches mentioned in the Bible?
There's a famous line in Deuteronomy that says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And that was often used by these Puritan authorities as a call to go into the community, root out these witches, and destroy them. And they really believed in Salem They were living in a wilderness. They were in the middle of a war with a local Native American tribe, the Wabanaki, that was going poorly. It was very harsh. It was a very isolated life, but they really thought that they'd come to this wilderness that was America to found a godly city on a hill. And they believed that the devil was out to thwart them. So they were constantly looking for this conspiracy of people that might be out to destroy this godly community, and witches kind of fit the bill.
It's so bizarre because I'm going, when did people stop believing in witches and all that stuff? It's mentioned in the Bible. People still believe in the Bible.
Yeah.
People are still there, like going, this is the truth, the light, the whatever. And,
They moved on from witches, though. Now it's
still in there.
Well, no, I mean,
It's
I
still
think
in
there are
there.
a lot of people who still consider themselves witches and still practice witchcraft and all that
Wiccan.
stuff. But I don't know. Maybe not in these terms.
No,
would they be considered
no one's
that?
ever
But
cast a spell on anyone.
well,
Okay, next question. What is Eye of Newt?
well, a
I
newt
think
is
it's the eye of a legless lizard of some type.
a newt.
Oh.
Those little what do you call it?
So they're only little
Amphibian.
tiny eyes. I thought they were a big eye that you threw in there, an Eye of Newt. Was there spells? Was there cauldrons? How accurate is that?
Well, no, those didn't exist. But I think what's interesting is people thought they did. I mean, some of these girls that were giving testimony in court that thought they were bewitched talked about a great gathering of witches, a great Sabbath that had happened near Salem, where just like in the stereotypes that we see at Halloween, they testified that witches flew in on brooms and the devil was there, and they did a black mass, and they had a big cauldron, and they cooked up all kinds of poisons and things to harm people. So, they really they believed in a lot of that kind of stuff. They thought this was a mass conspiracy. It was sort of like a QAnon type thing.
I tell you the way to catch witches, the easiest way. You go to the cauldron shop.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you go to the cauldron shop. Who's your main customers?
They don't have cauldrons anymore. They just have crock pots.
Yeah, they would have had cauldrons back then.
Oh, back then, yeah.
Back
yeah.
then, like regular people were using cauldrons, and it's like, that's why, that would be my defense. I'm a frying pan guy. Yeah, go to my house. See if you can find a fucking cauldron.
That's your
But we know you have an Instant Pot, though, you fucking
So
witch.
you keep mentioning that girls that were bewitched. I didn't ask Jim this question, but what types of traits might someone display before they are deemed bewitched? What does that mean to be bewitched?
Well, they had, one thing is, people at the time, they were not totally credulous about witchcraft in the sense of always jumping to that conclusion. In other words, these little girls that started having these symptoms of convulsions and contorting their bodies and shrieking out and things like that, they sought a medical explanation first, and they went to a doctor first. Then they went to a minister, and the second thought was, well, we could pray and we could fast, and maybe God will take away this affliction. And it was only later that they started to suspect witchcraft, after this doctor said, I've tried all the medical explanations, and I'm not, and medicine was not that advanced at the time. And he said, I can't find out what's going on. So I think that maybe something, evil has happened, and maybe they've been bewitched.
I have a serious question here, and I this is not me trying to make a joke. Could it possibly be that those girls had just had orgasms? Like when you're saying convulsing and this and screaming out loud and all that sort of stuff, because back then the female orgasm wasn't even acknowledged. Could that be what happened?
Well, okay. I think it might have been actually the opposite of that.
Oh.
Some scholars have said that these girls were acting out because they were living in such a repressive environment where, they were in the home of the minister. They were going to church all day on Sunday and hearing sermons about fire and brimstone. And they were coming home all week and hearing the minister telling them, about sin and about the devil and about hell and about, whether they were going to go to heaven or not, about all these kind of things. So they were living in this pressure cooker environment. Also, as women, they were very low on the totem pole in a place like Salem. This was a very misogynistic age. As young people, they didn't have much of a voice. Many of them, of the ones that suffered these kind of episodes, were servants, so they were low in terms of status. So, a lot of scholars have looked at it and said maybe they were acting out to get attention or to try to loosen the bonds a little bit of this society around them. Because when they started accusing people, they came to court and crowds of 100 people showed up. And, they for the first time in their life, grown men, ministers, judges, they were coming and listening to every word they said.
Oh, wow.
That's the doctor's fault too, though. When those they didn't know anything, so they just had the flu, and they're
The
like,
doctors
"Must be
are
a
like,
witch."
you got ghosts in your blood. Do cocaine.
Did all these people have like a Boston accent? Because that changes the way.
That's so true.
I got the
can't
witch
do
in
that.
me.
Yeah,
Fucking witch.
she's wicked awesome witch, that one.
So I asked Jim what caused them to start hunting for witches. Like, well, if there was a catalyst or impetus, he said all the women got together and were gossiping, and one guy was trying to call his wife a bitch and a speech impediment.
Yeah, one guy was trying to call his wife a
couldn't have
bitch,
been right,
and he
yeah.
had a speech impediment.
So what happened there?
Well,
Looking back at
was
it, yeah.
that was something else that I think Jim sort of got wrong in this case. And in a couple answers, Jim talked about men accusing women of being witches. But one of the interesting things about witchcraft accusations is it was almost invariably women accusing other women.
Oh, they don't support each other in the workplace. Oh, yeah. You're not wrong there. Oh, I knew us men did nothing wrong. Thanks, Jason. It's been a great podcast. Anyway,
and in this case, this is where this figure of Tituba is really important. Tituba was an enslaved woman that the minister Samuel Parris had brought with him. He'd been a planter in Barbados and failed. And then he came to Boston and tried to be a businessman and failed at that too. So finally he became a minister and was brought to Salem. Well, this enslaved woman that was living in his house, she was the first person who was accused by these young girls of being a witch and of bewitching them, probably because she was an outsider. But she was smart enough to know that if she would have tried to deny it, she would have been jailed and probably executed. So instead, she immediately confessed and said, yes, I am a witch, but if you keep me alive, I can tell you about all the other witches who are in this coven. I can tell you about the devil and his plans.
Nice.
So she named, a dozen people who then were ultimately also arrested and accused. I mean, one of the tragedies of the trial is everyone who confessed to witchcraft made it. Everyone who maintained their innocence and tried to argue that everyone was wrong and the charges were unfounded, those were the people that risked being executed. So she actually survived, that is Tituba. But after her time in jail, you had to pay your own jail costs then. So when she was finally released from the Boston jail, Samuel Parris refused to pay her prison expenses. So she was sold off into slavery to someone else. But she was not, she wasn't executed for witchcraft.
She took the plea deal and then snitched on everybody.
Where
Liar.
one of those rat witch.
Snitches get stitches.
Where did the outfit come from? Was there any famous witch who wore the pointy hat and the cloak, or was that just something that was put in books years later?
Yeah, that's from Halloween cards and things like that.
Did any of them own a black cat?
No, but I will say this: they were in English witchcraft belief. All witches had a demonic familiar. That is, some creature, could be a cat, could be a lizard, could be a small bird, things like that, a toad, that they believed the devil gave them to help them work their magic, like a little imp. And they supposedly they fed this imp with their blood through a little witch's teat. Oh. So one of the terrible things that happened during the trial was when these women, oftentimes they could be 60 years old, 70 years old. They were arrested. They would bring in midwives to brutally search every part of their bodies looking for these witches' teats as part of the evidence.
Right. So we know what parts we're talking about here.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Didn't stop at armpits. Let's put it that way.
No, you're exactly right.
You had mentioned yesterday when we were talking this science or the journal Science article that argued the Salem witch hunt might have been caused by an outbreak of. Well, I'll let you say the.
Yeah, this is an interesting theory, although it's been subsequently debunked in the 70s. This famous article in Science magazine suggested that this was an outbreak of ergotism. Ergot is a type of mold that grows on rye that can cause, it's a relative of LSD. It's an alkaloid that can cause hallucinations and sort of like a drug trip. So people suggested in the 70s, well, maybe these girls, maybe you're going to go dunk your rye bread in some water.
So this isn't real. I'm sorry, I brought it up then. I thought it was like something that happened.
No.
Okay, yeah.
No. It is real. This absolutely does happen. the point. Some people suggested maybe that's what these girls were doing. Maybe they were actually sort of tripping out and thinking they really saw these people, but it turns out that the climate probably wasn't right for that to be the case. Okay. But that leads to one of the biggest questions of this whole phenomenon. That's this mystery of, so what were these girls up to? Did they really think they were bewitched? Did they really think these women were witches? Or were they sort of being like juvenile delinquents and acting out? Or were they, having fun with this until people started being executed and they got in over their heads? Or, there is some evidence that they were faking it, because there were times where they would show up in court and say, oh, goody nurse bit me, and they'd roll up their sleeve and there'd be a bite mark on their arm that they, clearly had done themselves. So, but it's hard to look back and find out what their motives were. Could be a mix of all of those things.
So what is a witch cake? Not Baskin Robbins layer. Jim gets the brownie Oreo.
I bet you if you went to Baskin Robbins and you asked for a witch cake, they would make you a fucking witch cake. Don't tell. I'll do it at Halloween.
Okay.
They'll have something ready on the fly.
Okay, so he may have been right technically, but I would say wrong in terms of Salem.
Okay.
A witch cake, it's a little gross, but in this case, when the first of these little girls was bewitched, a neighbor, Mary Sibley, went to Tituba and said, I know that from back on Barbados that you knew some things about magic. Could you help me make a witch cake? And what that was, it's an old tradition, a type of folk magic. You would take oats and you would take the urine of someone who was bewitched, in this case, this young girl, Betty Paris, and mix it together, bake a cake, and feed it to a dog. And they believed that once the dog ate it, that it would cause the witch to break the hex.
Same recipe as Baskin Robbins.
Yeah, so you feed it to a dog. I don't know.
Oh, well, you meant to, but we've gotten a lot sloppier. Our diets have gotten worse as the years have gone on.
Wow. Okay, it's amazing that was a thing. These people. I don't care if it was the 1600s.
Like, why was this lady from Barbados in the 1600s? Like, I didn't think there was many immigrants from Barbados at that stage, if at all.
Well, that's one of the interesting things. Reverend Paris, the minister in Salem, had brought her from Barbados when he had immigrated to Salem. Actually to Boston first and then to Salem, but she was this enslaved woman that sort of he owned, and he brought her into his home, and then it kind of led, she became a central figure in this. I mean, after the episode with the witch cake, when he found out about it, he went into a rage, threw it out in the yard, yelling and screaming and saying that they were turning to the devil to stop the devil. He thought that using folk magic like a witch cake or something like that, he felt like it was just as bad as witchcraft in a sense. So it also helped kind of bring up the anxieties even more.
But if she was a slave, she should have just been like this. Look, I do what I'm told. This person came to me to ask for a fucking witch cake. I'm a slave. So I just did it. I'm a slave, not used to saying no to people.
You get some urine, you put some oats, just feed it to a dog.
She asked me to piss in a cup, I pissed in a cup, I'm a slave.
We did talk about men were definitely accused, but more women were, and we discussed why.
Are the men called warlocks, or are they called witches as well?
In Salem, at least, they called them witches as well. There were 19 people who were executed, hanged for witchcraft at Salem. 14 of them were women and 5 were men. I mean, and that's typical across the board. Back in Europe, 80% of the people accused of witchcraft and 80% of people executed for witchcraft were women.
And these women want to talk about equality.
They believe
you got to die more.
70
it's
cents.
Not fair. You got to die more in history.
You got to die more back then. It's
Salem sucks.
Yeah, we acknowledge you.
So the burned at the stake, and I've always heard that too. The Jim had mentioned it. They threw them in the water, and if they couldn't swim, they were off a cliff. That wasn't in Salem. That's a whole different.
That was not in Salem. That was back in England. This idea of swimming a witch. Although Jim was right about that, they did do the swimming test at times there in England. That is, but it's not in Salem.
Do they? Sometimes you see it in the movie. They just throw them in the water, and sometimes they get dipped in a bucket. Like in a big sort of like a well bucket where they sort of get dipped in, so if they don't swim, they can lift them back out. Was the bucket theory ever used?
Yeah, they call that a ducking stool.
Oh, yeah.
Dunk them in, but But oftentimes that was usually not an official sort of test. It was done by as part of mob violence against women that were suspected of being witches. So they were often just kind of hauled down to the mill pond and thrown in, and then some mob would be jeering, and it would work out that way.
I've lived in England, and many of the women still can't swim. It's too cold. Like, I'm serious. A lot of English people can't swim in comparison. Now I'm going to get English people going, well, you can swim. We splash around. We don't like to get our heads wet.
What was the touch test? Jim said they had warts and you felt them like Braille.
Witches have lots of warts.
Yes. Are you telling him?
Well, he was close on that, in terms of the physical inspection they did. But in terms of the touch test, what that's about is in court, they force these women, so all these young girls are brought to court and they're just standing around yelling and screaming and falling into fits every time they bring one of the suspects into court. And they would start screaming and saying, Goody Nurse is tormenting me right now. Look, she's biting me, or she's attacking me, in spectral form. And so once they went into one of these fits, the judges would say, well, a sure test will be if we force Goody Nurse to come over and touch, say, Betty Paris or Mercy Lewis or one of these other girls. If she touches them and they stop having these fits, it'll show that she's the witch and she's controlling them. And so, again, it's this kind of very slippery use of evidence that's not really conclusive, and it was even controversial at the time to get these convictions.
Well, if it's so clear that you could fake that.
Right, yeah.
It seems like, Kelly's touching me.
Yeah.
Forrest touched me. Ooh.
I'm not touching that. That's Arnie.
Okay.
No, but you're exactly right.
All right. We talked about the role religion played in these events. I don't know, with the Bible.
What I want to know is why did this become so famous? If witch hunts and all of this stuff have been happening for really as long as back to Mesopotamia, how did this become like the big historical event that people talk about, as opposed to the things where many more people were executed and stuff like that?
No, it's a good question. I mean, I think even though it's not one of the biggest witch hunts or one of the most deadly, there certainly is this sense that it's become part of American popular culture. After Arthur Miller's play, movies, television, things like that, it really becomes an iconic kind of piece of American history. And I think that's a big part of it. And Salem itself has kind of made a cottage industry out of their reputation as being the site of the trials. Like, it said that they call themselves Witch City, USA, and there's all kinds of major festivals that go on there at Halloween time and things like that. So
I'd like to go to Salem. I don't think there's a gig there. What is it, like an hour outside of Boston or something like that?
I don't know.
Is it near Boston? It's an hour outside of Boston?
That's right.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
I won't bother then. I didn't know it was such a long drive.
There's also been some recent efforts to make amends for what happened. And I think those are interesting too. And in 2001, the state of Massachusetts finally came back and exonerated all of the people that were convicted in Salem.
And what are they going to give the witches? 40 acres and a black cat?
Also, 2001, it's like, they're like, hey, guys, let's get together. And like,
we just determined witches not real.
Yeah, the war in Iraq is blazing. And they're like this, I'm busy with other stuff. I'm the cabinet of witches.
It was their families that put the pressure forward to try to get the state to do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, descendants.
What do they care for? I don't give a shit what happened to my great-great-great-great-grandfather. Like, if he was a witch, he might have been. I don't know.
What if
I would assume it's a form of people asking for reparations for the torture of their families or something. Like, I mean, people ask for reparations for slavery.
They didn't kill him. You made it all the way here, all right? They like,
some of them got killed.
Oh,
but what if they were accused of murder, let's say?
Okay, I believe that my great-great-grandfather was possibly a convict in Australia. There's reason to believe this. And he was sent to Australia, and I don't want reparations for him going to Australia.
But what if he was a convicted murderer, but he wasn't?
But how would I prove that? I wasn't there in 16, whatever. Their grandparents probably were fucking witches.
But if he so let's say he had been convicted and sent.
This isn't reparations like when
slavery
slavery is a definite, like this person was a slave, the end. We're speculating on court cases that happened in the 16th.
But what if he was exonerated? Wouldn't you want some like, okay, we should fucking get some reparations for this because you ruined his life?
Oh, please.
And then that sets
bloody-
the chain of ruining everybody else's life.
Oh,
when
yeah,
your dad's
oh,
in prison.
Yeah,
Come on.
all right.
So what did they?
Give
They
up.
just got their name cleared, or they didn't get money, right?
No, they just got their names cleared.
Yeah. And 20
And
eyes of newts.
Oh, okay. Okay. As long as there wasn't any cash handout. I don't mind getting their names cleared. I thought people were like, cash grab. And they're like driving around in Ferrari. And then they'd be like, hey, Kevin, what happened to you? Turns out my grandfather wasn't a witch.
They've got like witch scholarships. I'm 1/16th witch.
Yeah.
And so Salem now is like a tourist attraction, basically. Right?
That's right. It's as I mentioned, it's known as Witch City, USA, and they have massive festivals and parties at Halloween time, and people come from all over the world to be there. They've got stores up and down the streets selling.
This is where everybody was
witchcraft
hanged.
paraphernalia.
We hung people here. Let's party.
Throw him in that river.
They didn't do rivers in
And
Salem.
they
You
just
said they did
sell-
it sometime.
They sell some witch-like stuff, right? And
Yeah,
they,
like Kelly was saying, the fastest growing religion in the West today is neo-paganism and Wicca. And so people come from all over the world to go to these witchcraft shops to buy maybe Eye of Newt, but books about witchcraft and about Wicca and things like that. And
what, like
it's a big
making
business.
furniture out of sticks. Isn't that what Wicca is?
That's Wicker.
That's Wicker.
What's the
Wiccan.
difference? I'm-
Wicca or
what's-
Wiccan
What's,
is a.
what's Wicca?
It's a
Wicca
witch.
is how you'd say Wicker in Australia.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wicca.
no, that's how you say it in
Jasmine-
Boston.
Jasmine out of Wicca.
It's Wicca's Wicca awesome. Wicca.
Wiccan,
Wiccan is like witchcraft.
yeah.
Oh, I never even heard of it.
Oh.
Too busy with me Scientology books.
Well, what was I gonna say? I don't fucking remember. I don't remember at all. Okay, and so
Also, I was right about Elizabeth Montgomery gets a statue. That's right.
Yes,
I
that's exactly
believe
right.
I've seen that somewhere.
That's exactly right.
She's one of these ones that I used to watch that show as a kid, right? And then as you get older, you don't think about things like that. I used to like the show. She wiggled her nose. If I was a witch, because you always had a different thing, right? Someone pulled their elbow, I'd do the eyebrow. That's how I do spells.
Yeah.
Eyebrow. I can move my nose as well.
yeah.
I'd do it as well. If you're not watching this, very good. Very good. But the thing is, I watched that show, and this is, when you watch something as a little kid, and you're like, that's a fun show. And then I watched a couple of episodes as an adult. Nothing wrong with Elizabeth Montgomery. Holy hell. She's a good sort. I never even noticed as a kid. I'll tell you
What? You didn't notice that she was
as
attractive?
a kid, you're just watching. I know she was like
Yeah.
but then I was like, she's something else. And I'll tell you what, I watched an episode of The Brady Bunch with my son the other day because he never seen it. That's the show I watched after school all the time. And I always used to like Marsha Brady. No, I'm all about Florence Henderson now. I've gotten older.
You've grown up.
Mrs. Brady.
Oh, I know
Whoa.
what I was going to say. I went into this crystal shop that's over here in Atwater Village, and it felt like everyone in there could have been witches. To like when you
There's
go
a
into one of those
shit ton of crystals. in
Yeah,
that
but when you go
store.
to
Oh
a
my
crystal
God.
shop and whoever's working there, you're like, you practice Wiccan.
Can we
Yeah.
can we just say that collecting crystals and rocks is complete bullshit? Our friend Tommy Caprio, who we reference every now and again, who's like hey, I grew up in Jersey, oh whoa type of guy, also believes like, hey, don't leave your crystals out in the sun.
No, you put them in the sun.
Put them
You
in
gotta
the
charge
sun.
You have to
Yeah.
recharge them.
That's the way to recharge them.
He always wears a crystal around his neck.
Yeah.
He is definitely the most interesting conglomeration
Wiccan.
of
He's a witch.
personalities.
Let's hang him. Let's hang Tommy.
Yeah, hang Tommy.
All right, this is a part of the show called Dinner Party Facts, where we ask our expert to give us one fact, obscure, interesting, or a couple facts that the audience can use to impress people about the subject of the Salem Witch Trials. What do you got?
All right, this one's less of a fact than an interesting anecdote. But there was a 20th victim of the Salem witch trials, Giles Corey, and he was not hanged because he refused to enter a plea. According to the law at the time, the only way you could be convicted is if you pled guilty or not guilty. He showed up in court. He was so disgusted by the proceedings that he refused to enter a plea at all. So they brought out an very, very old, rarely used English law that allowed them to press him, it was called. And they took this old man and laid him out on a board, and they put another board over his chest. And over the course of 3 days, they started piling rocks on him. And then every 20 minutes, they'd come out and say, "Are you ready to give your plea yet?" and he kept quiet, and they kept piling on more and more stones. His tongue started lolling out of his mouth, and the sheriff came by with a walking stick and shoved it back in a couple times every day. And he lasted for days and days. And then right at the end, they asked him if he had anything to say, and his last words reportedly were "more weight." And then they piled more rocks on him, smashed him flat, and he died. But the thing that's interesting about it is that happened in September of 1692, right at the end of the trials. And some people argue that kind of a public, they just laid him out in the town square, that kind of public display of cruelty and torture that everybody was walking by and seeing was one of the things that may have caused people to start having doubts about whether they were really doing God's work by hunting these supposed witches. His wife was hanged 3 days later, but she was in a batch of the last people to be hanged. Right after that, the trials kind of dwindled and then ended.
Is that on the tourist walk? Do they have
How much weight can you handle?
And also, his last words were more weight, but his tongue was very large. And it was what he actually said was no weight.
No more weight.
That's where they do the keg stance right there. They're like, it's good.
I would have been Monty Pythoning the whole thing. You call that a rock? This feels light as a feather. Keep putting more on.
All right. Jason Coy, thank you for being here. The book is called The Devil's Art. It's a book about folk magic and witchcraft. You can buy that anywhere that you think you can buy books, Amazon and the other places. Any last words, Jason, for us? More weight.
Thanks a lot. I really had fun.
Thank you so
thanks
much.
for coming on the podcast, man. We learned something. I won't recall a lot of it, but I definitely learned about the guy with the rocks on the board of his chest. I'll never get that image out. And I know my son's new time out, what that's going to be.
More Lego.
Yeah. If you're ever at a party and someone comes up to you and they said, over 25 people were killed in the Salem witch hunts, you go, well, I don't know about that. And you walk away. Good night, Australia.